We are beginning a 7-week journey today, and we are going to be taking a look at short little phrases that are like little gems that we can pull out and use at any time we need to feel encouraged or inspired or uplifted. As I mentioned when I gave you the readings this morning, the series is based on one of my favorite little books. We have a few of them in partners upstairs. The book is called The 7 Whispers, Listening to the Voice of Spirit. It's written by Christina Baldwin, and it's like 7 directions, 7 mantras, if you will, that are easy to remember and easy to call into practice. I don't know if this is true for you, but I know for myself that I do better when I have a variety of spiritual tools and practices that I can use. I certainly have a morning routine and a morning practice that includes prayer and meditation, and sometimes the kind of prayer I do, sometimes the kind of meditation I do shifts a little bit over the years. It includes journaling. So I have a kind of a formal thing that I do pretty much every single morning, no matter where I am. But then I find that throughout the day, I like to have things that I can remember that just help me in the moment when something comes up and I feel like, well, I don't have 15 or 20 or 30 minutes to just sit down and meditate and journal and pray. And so I look at these, and maybe that's why I was so drawn to the book when I first came across it years ago. I look at these 7 whispers as those little tools I can put in my pocket and pull out whenever I need them. And so this first one is called Maintain Peace of Mind. Say that with me. Maintain peace of mind. Maintain peace of mind. In the introduction to the book, The 7 Whispers, Christina Baldwin kind of sets the stage on this whole idea of our connection with the divine and how very natural that desire for that connection is. Even though we might use very different words to describe it, that there seems to be this natural longing of the heart, of the soul, of the spirit, to connect with something beyond just itself. And whether we look at that in religious terms or philosophical terms or spiritual terms doesn't really matter, but there's that longing. This is how she writes about it. She wrote, "I have believed all my life that there is a necessary interaction that occurs between a person and the divine. This interaction does not come only to prophets, bodhisattvas, and other great spiritual masters. It comes to us, ordinary people in ordinary lives. It is part of our natural human capacity to call out one of the 1,000 names of God. And it is part of our human capacity to perceive and interpret the response. Call and response is perhaps the oldest impulse we know. Humankind has always looked up and bowed down before the mysteries of the universe and asked God to become present. Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, religions arise from a lineage of trembling prophets who understand that if summoned, God might actually appear. Their stories say these were ordinary men and women who were pulled out of their ordinary lives into the service of what they summoned forth. Knowing this, we stand in our own ordinariness and surmise that God might also actually appear to us and break us open to the life of service hiding within everyday details. What an amazing opportunity we have to discover our own language of call and God's own language of response, and to take responsibility that as the times we live through become less ordinary, we ourselves become less ordinary in response to the needs of the times." Her writing about this idea of call and response, the natural impulse within our heart, within our spirit, within our soul, to reach out to something beyond ourselves and want to receive something back from that divine, is not dependent upon a religion. And even her use of the word God, and oftentimes she puts it in quotes because that word can be so charged for so many people and charged in a negative way. But that yearning, that desire to connect is a very real yearning and desire. When she writes, what an amazing opportunity we have to discover our own language of call and God's own language of response. To me, this is a key idea. It's where it becomes personal. It's where it becomes not about the God that we might have been taught to believe about or in our upbringing, but a very personal understanding or relationship with what we think of when we think of the one, when we think of the divine. And as we mature spiritually, I think that in part what happens is we do develop our own language, if you will, our own way of reaching out to and listening to and for that divine, listening to and for that presence. The longing to connect with something beyond ourselves is, I think, the longing to connect with the one whose heart beats with ours. To connect with the one whose heart beats with ours. And it's not a movement into a religion, and it's not even a movement away from a religion. It's a movement into a spiritual relationship or connection with that presence, with that energy, with that mystery, with that one. What's important for us to realize is that the connection is always possible. That divine connection is always possible, equally available to every one of us, no matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter the circumstances of our upbringing, no matter whether we believe or we don't believe. It's impersonal that way, in that it's always available. Kind of like our phone connecting with another is always available, right? The connection is always there, but the burden, the responsibility is on us. The connection's available, but the responsibility is on us to answer the call, to be responsive to the call. Sometimes we ignore the call. Sometimes we send the call to voicemail. Sometimes we don't even recognize the call because the contact isn't in our contact list. Right? How many of us now get notifications when a phone call comes in? If that number is not on our contact list, it's listed as potential spam, right? I kind of think that's a relationship that some of us have with God, when Spirit is trying to be there for us, trying to answer our call, but we don't recognize it. We don't recognize it, or we send it to voicemail. Why would we not recognize it? I think sometimes we don't recognize it because we're expecting it to be this earth-shattering voice, or we're expecting it to answer in a very particular way, or it answers in a way that we go, that's not the answer I wanted. So let me pray again until I get the answer that I want. Has anybody ever done that, or am I the only person that's ever done that, right? So this call and response that Christina Baldwin suggests, I think, is this beautiful language for each of us developing our own relationship, our own way of connecting to, and then listening to and listening for that still small voice. And so in each of the 7 whispers that we're going to be looking at, it's really, I think, all about how do we connect with that presence, and how do we keep that connection vibrant and alive? And the first, I would have to agree, is a solid starting point. The first whisper that she gives us, the first thing to remember, is this practice of maintaining peace of mind. Maintaining peace of mind. Eddie Hillesum, in An Uninterrupted Life, wrote, "There is a really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. Sometimes I'm there too. But more often, stones and grit block the well, and God is buried beneath. Then he must be dug out again. Can you connect with any part of that? And substitute the word God for something else if that word is troublesome to you. But it's in essence deep within us, and we in it as well. But when our lives are so crowded with so much other stuff, and our minds are so pulled in so many different directions, it's as if that presence is pushed down and seems so far and so unavailable to us. I had an interesting comment from my mom. My mom is back with us for a few months right now. And we're in our family dealing with a lot of extra stuff. We always have a lot going on in our lives, a lot in the ministry, a lot personally, but even more now. And so much so that oftentimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night with my mind just going over and over and over. And the other day, my mom said to me, she must have walked down the hall and seen me in my morning meditation time. And later that day, she said to me, Wendy, I don't know how you can meditate with everything that you've got going on in your life. How do you do that? I said, Mom, it's because I have all of this going on in my life that if I didn't discipline myself to at least practice and attempt the practice, everything else would be that much more complicated, that much more difficult. If there's any sanity I'm experiencing at all right now, Mom, it's because of doing the very best I can to have my own call and response to the divine, my morning practice, as a way of being able to maintain a certain calmness so that there is wisdom that can come forward. There is understanding that can come forward. There is guidance that can come forward. Christina Baldwin in the book uses a visual of the shallow bowl. She writes about her experience this way. With outstretched hands, I'm holding a shallow bowl. The bowl is filled with clear water. The bottom of the bowl is lined with pebbles and shells that represent all the things that clutter my mind: extraneous thoughts, feelings, tasks, commitments, the stuff of life. I stare through the water and see the busyness of my life slightly altered by the sheen of stillness. I am separate from my doing, waiting and calm. This peace of mind is where all spiritual direction starts. And to keep finding our way, we need to keep returning to this state of calm mind and open heart. Returning to this state of calm mind and open heart. That's encouraging to me, because if it was that I had to be there all the time, I would find that to feel almost impossible, at least at where I am in my development. But in understanding that it is the returning to this state of calm mind, that's what I'm moving toward, then that seems reachable to me. That seems reasonable to me. Our minds are not trained. I don't think they are. I don't think our minds are trained for stillness. In fact, I think we train our minds to everything but stillness unless we have specific practices that we use on a regular basis. For many of us, our minds are like a committee of not so nice people in there. Your laughter tells me that you are familiar with this committee. Let me guess who might be part of your committee, and maybe we have some of the same people. That judge. Do you have a judge on your committee? Do you have a critic on your committee? Do you have, sorry mom, sorry dad, do you have a voice that sounds like mom or dad on your committee? Yeah? Do you have the biggest, worst mistake you've ever made in your life on that committee? Yeah? Do you also have a cheerleader on that committee? God, I hope you do. Do you also have a friend or an encourager or a believer on that committee, right? It's pretty crowded in there, right? I think it takes time. I think it takes practice. I think it takes a certain living through experiences of life for us to begin to train the mind to listen to the right voices, if you will, to listen for the right guidance. I have this little thing I do when I'm aware that it's the committee that's pulling me in a lot of different directions and giving me messages that I know are not healthy, are not helpful, are not life-giving, are not supportive. I say to them, "Oh, you again." And I do it with that kind of attitudes, in my head. "Oh, you again, I'm not listening to you." Or, "Oh, you again, go to your room." "Oh, you again, you get to go to voicemail." "Oh, you again." I need these fun, more lighthearted ways, personally, to deal with the stuff that can pull me down. To be able to recognize it is one of the first steps, though, right? To recognize that, oh, wait a minute, there's something else going on in here, and I don't have to give it my attention. I don't have to give it my attention. Peace of mind, I think, is something we practice. We practice it. And it's not really a mental thing as much as it is a spiritual state. I think it's a state of calm. I think it's a state of quiet. I think it's a state of open-hearted welcoming. It's a receptive state. In the book, she writes about 2 levels of peace of mind that I think are helpful to keep in mind. One level is pretty easy to cultivate, and one level is really the level of just quiet, sitting down, being quiet, not having our faces on a screen, not having earbuds in our ears, of getting quiet, getting as still as we possibly can, like we do in our meditation time here, particularly like we do in the time of practicing in complete stillness and complete silence. That's certainly one level of peace of mind. That deeper level of peace of mind is very hard to put into words because it's more like a communion with the divine. It's not just a quiet, tranquil, calm, serene state. It takes it one step deeper or one step further into an experience I would say, that feels like communion, a connection with the one whose heart beats with ours. Does that make sense? Have you ever had a taste of that? Nod your head if you know it. And it's hard to put into words, isn't it? We can describe a quiet mind. We can describe being more calm and tranquil and still. But this communion, I think, is a very personal experience. And when we have a taste of that, I think it encourages us to remember that there's a different way of living and being, that we do carry within us this reservoir, if you will, of the divine, this reservoir of wisdom, this reservoir of peace that we can move into and through to deal with whatever stuff does come up in our life experience. There was a quote in the book that I found really helpful, and it was in the part of the chapter where she's writing about how difficult it can be to maintain peace of mind when we're in emotional turmoil. Would you agree? And yet that's the very time that we probably would benefit most of all of doing what we can to maintain peace of mind, is when we're dealing with stuff that's got us emotionally struggling or feeling challenged. It's another Eddie Hillesum quote, and it is this: "You can't think your way out of emotional difficulties." There's more to it, but just take that for a moment. You can't think your way out of emotional difficulties. Think about that for a moment. You might even want to write that down. And the next time that you're in a state of emotional difficulty, just see if that's true for you. Just see if trying to think your way out of that works for you. And he says, you can't think your way out of emotional difficulties. That takes something altogether different. You have to make yourself passive then and just listen. You have to make yourself passive then and just listen. And here's a phrase that really caught me. Reestablish contact with a slice of eternity. Reestablish contact with a slice of eternity. What that does inside of me, that phrase, reestablish contact with a slice of eternity, it helps pull me out of the focus on whatever the turmoil is that I've been stuck in. To reestablish contact with a slice of eternity, to me, is to remind myself to hold perspective, to remind myself that whatever it is that is so present right now that seems to be pulling me out of peace of mind is not the entirety of my life. It may feel like it in the moment, but the truth of the matter is it is not the entirety of my life. It is something that's happening now, but it's not all that is happening now. Does that make sense? Reestablish contact with a slice of eternity. Perspective. There was a before, and there will be an after. What is the biblical phrase? This too shall pass. This too shall pass. A couple more ideas here. I don't know if this was in the chapter or if I was just remembering this as I was putting this lesson together. I was reminded of Brother Wayne Teasdale and some of his writings and some of his work. I got to meet him in our first synthesis dialogues with the Dalai Lama in 1999. And in Brother Wayne Teasdale's book, The Mystic Heart, he's writing about different ways that people seem to think about or identify God. And he made the observation when he was researching the book, he found that when he asked people in the West, where is God? They tended to point to the sky. Think about it. I'm guilty of this. Oftentimes when I'm talking about God, I find myself looking up. That's the same thing to me as pointing to the sky, right? He says, when he was researching the book, he found that when asked, people in the West tend to say, where is God? They point to the sky. When he asked people in the East the same question, they tended to point to their chest, their heart. I think they're a lot closer to it than we who do this like me, to in here, closer than our breath, closer than our breath. Any spiritual practice, I believe, is at its heart meant to help us establish and maintain a connection with the divine. To establish and maintain a connection with the divine. One of the simplest practices I think that we can do to remind us of that, to help us move into this state of maintaining peace of mind, is one that I learned years ago from Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, the 3 breaths. And there's a couple of different variations of it, but one variation is taking one deep breath and then releasing it, and with that breath, just letting go, doing the best you can to let go of the list making, the mental chatter, whatever's going on in the mind, just one breath. Breathe in, breathe out, let it go, whatever it is. Another breath in, another breath out, to be present, physically present, to be aware of where you are, sitting in the chair, or whatever it is that you're doing, to be fully present. And then the third is to be present to the question, and now what? And now what? Can you imagine if all of our big decisions that we have to make, or important decisions that we have to make, we subject them to this little routine, this little practice, letting go, clearing out the clutter, clearing out, sending those voices to voicemail or putting them in their room, asking ourselves to be fully present, and then deeply asking the question, now what? Now what? A simple practice, a simple practice. So I'm going to close with a few more words from her book. I'm going to encourage you to consider getting a copy of it. I think it's still available online. There's a Kindle version. There's not an Audible version, and I think we have a few copies. But it's worth your read. So she closes, or I'm closing with her words, how many decisions flow through our lives in the course of a day? Now, as it has always been, the constant little acts of yes and no, of welcome and refusal, shape who we are and determine where we're going. I want to make these choices within a spiritual context, and that is what I pray for. Nobody taught me to do this, or else everything in my whole life has taught me to do this. I am simply practicing being she who asks to see if that which answers has a message in this moment. Namaste.